continually be tempted by all sorts of expressions of self-centeredness, because that is the great enemy of both the lives, to turn, because it is, after all, like we said in the beginning, the nature of all sin, to turn away from God and from the others, and to find fulfillment in the gratification of the self for the self's sake. That's why everyone, I think we could say, this is not an opinion, but can be safely said for everyone, and particularly the older you get, it seems to me, the greater the need. I think that we're always at every age tempted to selfishness. Children are tempted to selfishness. Adolescents are tempted to selfishness. Young people are too, and people in every age. But it seems to me, as I see myself, can no longer speak of myself as young, it seems to me that the temptations to selfishness become sharper and deeper the older you get. And one of the greatest safeguards against them, and it's kind of built in to the marital relationship, that if someone is with some amount of purity of heart and selflessness enters into marriage, there is the factor of first the spouse and then the children, and hopefully soon. That's another issue, but we can maybe talk about that another time. Because after all, that is why it is blessed and why it is given. Can't be reduced to that alone, but and there are exceptions, but the exceptions prove the rule. Within the married life, there is a built-in factor that if the married people cooperate with it, cancels out selfishness, or at least helps to cancel out selfishness. For the unmarried, it is more difficult, and therefore they need, even if they are, and I say this to you because a number of you are on your way to marriage, and perhaps some of you will join the endangered species list. I don't know. But in the meantime, until you have come to the point of making this choice, though that pattern of life which is given to those who choose virginity to life is given to you, all of you, for this time in your life, and central to that is we all have to be continually looking for ways that we can express, and we need to express it, and I think in a very hands-on fashion. Love for others, and not being concerned with ourselves and our preoccupations and what we want to do with our time. In my own life, during this period, God has given me that with the care of my mother, which is a great and saving grace for me. However imperfectly I do it, and however much I complain about it, which I do sometimes. But I also know that it is saving for me. It is grace-filled. And I also know that when the time comes that expression of it comes to an end in time, that I'm going to have another. It won't be the same way. It won't be the same situation. But I know that for me, unless there is a constant way and expression of care for the other that involves the crucifixion of myself, even if it's not a big dramatic crucifixion, but day by day being inconvenienced for the sake of the other. I'm going to have to ask God to provide me that, and I am selfish and wicked enough that I'll ask it gritting my teeth. But it's got to be asked for, because without it, there is always the danger of what takes the ultimate form in the crazy hermit, So we back to what I said before that digression. When we embrace one life or the other, we, unless there's particular one or two of us who may be well on our way to sanctity and union with God, but otherwise we embrace it as sinful, fallen people. that means with a mixture of all kinds of things. In that mixture is some desire for what is right, some true love. We have to face, though, that a great deal of what we think at the beginning is love for others or even love for God is really, because selfishness is so deeply rooted in us, love for the self. Sometimes we can even love ourselves through other people, and it's not really the other we love, it's ourself, using the other as the tool. And we can do that with God, too. That's why God, though, is of course smarter than us. And if there is just a little bit of sincerity in us, he cures us of that. The way he does it is, it's called spiritual dryness or spiritual aridity. That means and I bet you all of you who have tried to pray have experienced at least a little bit of what I'll mention here. That. When people decide they have some sort of experience, response of the grace of God, and they want to begin to live their lives in accordance to what God has shown us and by the tradition of the church. Often at the beginning, there is a time of great enthusiasm, and it's easy to do all these things, and easy to have a rule of prayer, and the services are wonderful, and it's easy, and then all of a sudden it stops, and it becomes and we try to pray, and we don't feel anything. And we come to church in a bad mood, and by the time the service is done, we're in a worse mood. Happens. Very common. In fact, I would say that a person to whom that doesn't happen to is living in a dream world. And that is, we have to begin to see that is the means that God provides us to purify our desire to follow him of its selfishness, you see, because it's easy to love, to think we love God and to pray and even to struggle against sin when we feel some result, and then we become very attached to the feeling we have, feeling good about ourselves. That is a form of self-love. And by self-love, I don't mean the healthy kind. We of course we are good and loved by God, and everything that we do and think has to begin there with the knowledge that we are loved by God. But it's the kind of self-love that we have to be freed from, and God frees us from it by taking away the candy. See, human relationships are the same way. People who get married, the initial energy of romance wears off. People who embrace virginity, the early fervor wears off. Episode 2 from St. Bernard and Company. Okay. So he goes off with his brothers and friends and relatives and who knows who else to this monastery where there has been an old elder who has been living with a very difficult life, but kind of like some ways like Simeon, who had been promised that in his old age, young disciples would come, and they do, and in great numbers. He must have been really astonished. And so they stay there for a while. For how long? Let's see. He was 22 years old, by the way, when he did all this. And after 3 years, seeing the great progress which Bernard had made, ordered him to go with 12. To found a new house. They walked in procession, singing psalms, with their new abbot at their head, and settled in a place called the Valley of Wormwood, surrounded by a forest. These 13 monks grubbed up a sufficient area, and with the assistance of the bishop and the people of the country, built themselves a house. This young colony lived through a period of extreme and grinding hardship. The land was poor, and their bread was of coarse barley. Boiled beech leaves were sometimes served up instead of vegetables. Tree leaves, boiled tree leaves. Go pick an armful of maple leaves or something, cook them for supper. Sounds appetizing. Bernard was at first so severe in his discipline, coming down upon the smallest distractions and the least transgressions of his brethren, that although his monks behaved with the utmost humility and obedience, they began to be discouraged. which made Bernard sensible of his fault. He condemned himself for it to a long silence. At length he resumed his preaching, and provided that meals should be more regular, though the food was still of the coarsest. The reputation of the house and the holiness of its abbot soon became so great that the number had risen to 130. And the name of the valley, which was called Valley of Wormwood, was changed to Clairvaux, because it was situated right in the eye of the sun. So, after the initial fervor, there was a period that, and from this description here, remember that what's described lasted a period of years. It must have been rather grim. And that's an expression, and we see it. It's that basic biblical rhythm. When the children of Israel come out of Egypt and pass through the Red Sea, they go into the desert. And we relive that experience every year because it's when Christ is baptized and the Holy Trinity is made manifest, he goes into the wilderness to fight the devil. The fathers of the church say that's a model that happens to each one of us. I forget who's addressed to the newly baptized that says, and what did you expect upon your baptism? That you are going to be freed from temptation? You are baptized to fight. If Christ met the devil after his baptism, you're going to meet what's in you. And that's what happens after the initial stage, that we find that most people find that they have embraced marriage, or they have embraced virginity with a mixture of purity and impurity of heart, and to the extent that the heart is in love with itself apart from God and the other, the only way to salvation is to be set free from all of that. And that means that the rest of life, then, whether it's for the married in mutual submission and obedience and sacrificial love, or in the case of the unmarried, the consecrated virgins, daily attempting more deeply to be living this virginity for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Because that another point that might be made is sometimes people have a very simplistic idea of what celibacy is. They reduce it to simply the renunciation of genital sexual activity. Well, that's part of what celibacy is, that's for sure. But the celibate life is a lot more than that, because we are sexual beings, and virginity, celibacy, does not mean the suppression of sexuality. We can no more suppress our sexuality than we can cease being human beings. So that means that the sexual energies in those who have embraced virginity, and I think you all know whether or not you're going to be living the virginal life to the end, you know that the sexual energies are still there, sometimes with great gusto. And that means that they have to be faced, and the one who is living the virginal life has to, by growing deeper in the life of prayer, obedience to the commandments of God, struggling against evil, must channel that energy to be the expression of love for God and for others. That is the only way to live a healthy celibate life. Otherwise, if that's not the case, it's bound to pop out in some unhealthy way, and the temptation, or even worse than the temptation, the actual realization of living a double life, is likely to happen. And for the married people, they will also discover that the temptation to, because we are not to have a gross and carnal understanding of the sexual relationship between man and woman. That the act of sexual union itself is to be the icon of the union of Christ and his church. One is to reflect the other. Therefore, unless that act is realized in a love that is sacrificial and not in fact loving oneself through the other and using the other as a tool for one's own gratification. And for most people, it will take a long ascetic labor within the context of marriage for that pure love to be realized. So these have been kind of random thoughts without too much organization. Maybe this is a good place to stop. But maybe they've provoked some questions in you, and we can have a little discussion. No. David?
You said that it's important for each one of us to make this decision at a certain point in life. Does making the decision to marry, is that synonymous with finding the person? Or what do you make the decision, yes, I'm going to marry in this life, and then wait to meet that person? What if you're 55 years old and you still haven't?
I think in general that and this is a generality. So general statements have only a certain use, because each one of us is a unique and particular expression. I think that generally speaking, a person who is 55 years old and has never married because, the right person never came along, or never could be really sure that it was right, and therefore the lifestyle of that person, even if it was not a specifically sinful lifestyle, was nevertheless an unresolved one. I think that person is in kind of an unfortunate circumstances. That much more could have been realized if that person would have had the strength of will either to marry if the opportunity had been given, or to reach an understanding that perhaps that person was called to virginal life for the sake of the kingdom of God.
So is there any way to prevent that? What does the young person do?
I would say that somebody who is trying to, I use this expression from a spiritual writer that I like, contemporary, Thomas Dubé. I like him very much. He uses the expression that we are called to live the gospel generously, respond to the gospel with generous hearts, respond to the circumstances of our life with generous hearts, respond to those with whom we live with generous hearts. That to the extent that we're doing that we are living lives that are focused on following God, being disciples of Christ, growing in prayer, living a life that is centered in the church, and by the church I mean the church in its fullness, not only in liturgical worship, which is the pinnacle of the experience of the church, but the whole life of the church day by day. That means life with one another, and opening ourselves up to relating with one another as people, learning how to relate with one another as people and not treat each other as objects. That's the day by day struggle for all of us. If a person is doing that, sooner or later, because of the grace of God and human nature, the way he's made it, that person will be either attracted to someone that leading toward marriage, or that person will discover that there is a desire in him to forego that particular expression of human love in order to be available to be an instrument of the love of God for everyone, a sign of the love of God for everyone, and that's what the celibate life is supposed to be. But so I guess I would say, again, I'm not trying to make an absolute statement here. I think there are absolute statements that can be made, but this isn't one. I think that someone who continues to have this question unresolved, and by the way, I don't suggest that you now go to your room and agonize over this. It is something to think about, because someone who has lived a large portion of their life without resolving this question, I think it's probably because there's something the matter, something that's making it very difficult, or perhaps in some cases impossible for that person. And by the way, we are going to find that there are things the matter with us on this journey, whether it's in marriage or whether it's in celibacy. We're going to find if it's with marriage, it's going to be with our spouse, and that together we're going to find that there are things the matter with each other. And if we're living the celibate life, we're going to find the same thing. That there are certain things that are wrong with us that make it impossible for the relationship, whether in marriage or the in virginity, to be working, to be operating as a channel of the grace of God in its fullness. And that is, of course, our sinfulness. It's the sinfulness that we have by choice, the sinfulness that we may have inherited, because there are tendencies to sin that are inherited, not guilt. We don't believe in inherited guilt. The Roman Catholic Church is celebrating today. It's one day different. They celebrate also the feast of the Conception of Mary, and they with the title the Immaculate Conception. And there's nothing wrong with even that expression, Immaculate Conception, but they mean specifically that there's this guilt that we inherit from our first parents that Mary was free of. That's why it doesn't make too much sense for us to because we don't speak of inherited guilt for anybody. So, but nevertheless, the reason why Mary's conception is immaculate is not because there is inherited guilt, but because she is conceived as the result of a man and a woman who are faithful to God and who receive her according to tradition as the fruit of their prayer, as an expression of their love. So for most of us, hopefully, in how we were brought into the world, there is some of that faith and some of that love also. But for some people, and for us, to a certain extent, there are also tendencies of sinful tendencies that we even inherit from our environment. That's what the scripture means by the sins of the parents being visited on the children. That if parents are unloving to one another and unloving to their children, then those children are also going to have that same. They're going to inherit that, and that doesn't mean, by the way, when we discover that there's really something the matter there. That it's precisely because there's something the matter that God has become man to save us. You see, and maturity in marriage or celibacy will involve this coming to terms with what's the matter. Coming to terms doesn't mean excusing it in ourselves. It means first of all facing it, and then once we see it for what it is, to be able to first of all to accept the salvation that comes from the Lord, and then cooperate with His grace to free us from what the block is, there in the channel of grace. Yes.
I have two questions. One, you spoke about spiritual aridity.
Mhm.
How is that overcome when things lose their charm and you're no longer in there on an emotional level to a certain extent? And also, my second question is, if you do choose, if someone were to choose a life of virginity, you spoke continuously of consecrated virginity, what do you feel is the necessity of how does entering an order, becoming within a structure, how does that play into the life of a celibate person?
The first is unanimous, I would say, teaching of the spiritual fathers and mothers about this, and also we have the example of the Lord Himself in the gospel, who experiences not only aridity but even to an extent that we cannot fathom, abandonment. Yet nevertheless says to His Father, "Not my will but yours be done." The way that we pass through the aridity and dryness is by determined faithfulness. That we learn to love God for His own sake by from the will, in order for us to be freed from dryness and from immature faith and hope. Our intellect and our emotions must repent and be cleansed. This is how God does it, by withdrawing any kind of sense of either intellectual or emotional comfort, so that the person who is passing through spiritual dryness tries to no longer is able to when they try to think about God, think about their relationship with God, think about how everything is going to work out in the end. The mind just kind of fails them. Or when they hope for some feeling of inner consolation, that's not there. So what is called for there is a heroic act of faith, act of the will, that I will continue to say my prayers even when I cannot pray, and that happens sometimes. What by that I mean, sounds like a contradiction, that I cannot pray with any sense of fulfillment, any sense of concentration, any sense of deriving any kind of pleasure from what I'm doing. Yet because I want this expression to express my love for God, I will do it anyway. That's not hypocrisy, by the way. Hypocrisy is to do something for the wrong reason. To make ourselves do something kind for someone we don't like is not hypocrisy. Sometimes people think it is. It's not. To make ourselves pray when we don't feel like praying is not hypocrisy. To continue on saying, as one of the things that Saint Nicholas is reported to have said when in prison, is that if I am abandoned by everyone and am the last Christian on earth, I will still continue to love God and keep His commandments. That's an expression of passing through the aridity. So it's through the will continually striving to keep the commandments of God, to live a life not because this aridity, if we what happens unfortunately is many people when they reach this just stop. They stop praying. They kind of abandon everything, and then so they get caught in the revolving door between going on to a higher expression of the spiritual life, because they lack the strength of will to continue through the desert. But you've got to continue if you're going to get anywhere, and that continuing purifies and the fathers tell us that